I don't forget to do it later.
Okay.
There we are. You are now being recorded.
And I've continued, so cool. It is now recording. I'm actually going to take this opportunity to just go and just take my inhalers, so I'm not throughout the thing. So I'll be back in a moment. It won't be long.
Why do you get bottles instead of cans? Huh?
I like cans.
Yeah, but why did you get the bottle?
Huh?
I said I got a bottle of Coke.
I like bottles of Coke. I like cans of beer.
No, why did you get cans?
We'll talk about it later. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Right. I'm just dashing about a bit, sorting out the otters again.
No worries.
Herding otters I am.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if you've ever seen otters. I've been to an otter sanctuary, and they're not very herdable. They're very bossy. A lot of demanding treats. Very sweet though.
Okay. There we go.
So this morning on the not park run, I thought I'd walked about 5 kilometers. I did. I am 300 meters short of my weekly total.
Right. You can also go out for a run at lunchtime, I think, can't you?
Well, less of the running, but I'll definitely go around the block, I think. That walk around the block might be to the shop to get some wine, though. I was thinking of having some later.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how that works in the grand fitness scale.
No danger of running out of beer in this house.
Well, yeah. No, I think as my committee will testify, I've recently discovered I'm super allergic to red wine, or I've developed what I'm going to call the keeling over allergy. Makes me very, very, very intoxicated very quickly. You know, kind of disproportionately so, and gives me migraines. I like red wine. Not anymore though. Yeah.
Right.
Let me know when you want me to go. It's just showing a couple of minutes on mine.
It is, yeah. So we're going to be starting in a couple of minutes, everybody. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat or on Discord, and I'll relay them to Esther. There's an otter link in the chat, and I'll put it in there in a minute. And everyone except program participants need to be muted and video off, please. If you aren't, I will assist you to comply. Remind me afterwards to restart your video, or the host in the main room can do it.
Yeah, and as Pat says, when I'm talking, I can't see the questions, but I'm happy to stop and talk about stuff. So I think probably what I'll do is I'll set an alarm as well. As I was just saying to Pat earlier, I didn't have time to rehearse this. So, but I've written I've written a lot of things this year. Written a lot of online talks, written a lot of online lectures. I should probably turn Pokemon Go off as well. Yeah. Oh, look at that. Oh, there's a bug I want to catch. As I was saying on the parkrun, there's a couple of really sort of momentous gaming anniversaries coming up. Dungeons and Dragons is 50 in 2024. 50. And Pokemon Go is 25 years, sorry, Pokemon is 25 years old, I think, this year or next year. It doesn't feel like a game that's that old, but as I was sort of thinking about it earlier as we were walking around, Pokemon Go is not played by younger people, it's played by kind of people my age who use it as a sort of fitness app. So having said that, there are two local rivals that we have in our Discord and kind of around the town. Alreg 55. I suspect Alreg is actually 55. He's got 3 accounts. And Kid Skid, who is actually a younger person, but they're kind of constantly fighting each other to sort of be the person with the most of things.
It's actually 11 o'clock, but do you want to wait another couple of minutes? We've got about a dozen participants. Or do you want to kick off? Up to you.
Yeah, I can kick off. I was just going to do kind of a little bit of an intro, and there's kind of it'll move in gradually. So, okay, let me just take a swig of coffee. It's the essential ingredient that makes me go. It's like oil in the cogs. Okay, so hello everybody. I sort of had a quick scroll down the names, and I think most people know me, but for those of you who don't, my name is Esther MacCallum-Stewart, and I'm an associate professor of games studies at the University of Staffordshire. And as I think those of you who just sort of heard the chatter, obviously this year has been very interesting. And one of the things that we had to do was convert all of our lectures, every single one, into an online format. And so whilst I have written this and sort of checked it over and moved things around a little bit, I haven't actually had time to time it. So actually, Alexa, could you set a timer for 50 minutes, please?
15 minutes, starting now.
I think she might have heard 15, never mind, we'll see. So yes, I don't have times on it, but also feel free to sort of ask questions during some of them. I hope I'll be able to say that's a later slide, but yeah. Okay, so before we get started, my computer's going to make an annoying ticking noise. I just want to go over this because actually I have given a couple of talks about pandemic gaming, and this is a very sort of Doug Spencer thing. You would have thought you wouldn't have to tell people, but sometimes you do. So this presentation is going to discuss gameplay responses to the pandemic, and that means that I'm going to use words which are quite extreme when describing it, which are often in-game terms. And I'll be obviously talking about games that deal with pandemics, that deal with diseases, and I might describe in-game activities which combat or develop them. I'm not going to comment in any way on any real-world political or medical responses to 2020, other than the World Health Organization's discussion of video gaming and gaming in general. So I will be talking about their particular campaigns, but that is it. It's very generalized. Please don't use the questions to comment on political or medical responses to the pandemic. And please don't use the comments or questions to speculate on or perpetrate misleading information about COVID-19. Thank you. So yes, this has actually happened in a previous talk that I gave. Okay, so what am I actually going to talk about? Okay, so this is such a lecturer slide. It's like, oh, I didn't find a picture of it in time. So I'll be talking about Matt Leacock's legacy. And for those of you, it's a bit of a joke on Matt Leacock there. For those of you who don't know who Matt Leacock is, he is one of the kind of key designer of the board game Pandemic, which was released in, I believe, 2009. I've just pulled that out of thin air, so I hope I got that right. But I'll be looking at both how that particular game and also other games sort of dealt with diseases and pandemics and outbreaks before 2020 and kind of how those have been established in games. And yeah, they seem incredibly gauche now. It's really interesting. I'll be giving some unexpected sales figures because I did actually do quite a lot of research about this during the year and as things were happening. And sort of talking about what kind of went on, what did people do, how did they do things. I'll be talking a little bit about the idea of touching things. Board games are very physical. We touch things, we move things around. They often have, I mean, Gloomhaven has over 1,000 parts, and we move those pieces and we share moving those pieces. And I'll sort of discuss a little bit about what that meant in terms of when we suddenly weren't allowed to do that. There will be an image of Badger, my cat. He had the zoomies about 5 minutes ago, so he may come charging across the screen. So let's hope that doesn't happen. And I'll talk a little bit about the future, but I kind of realized I was running out of time. So yeah. Okay, so I love this quote from Scott Beattie. I just think it's brilliant. This was from March last year. And he said, before we lived with the reality of a global disease outbreak, pandemic was just the title of a series of board games. And we actually found it quite difficult when we were teaching it, because when you teach board games, which we do, you're kind of constantly talking about Matt Leacock's Pandemic. It's a sort of integral part of board games history. It's changed the ways that people understood games. It wasn't the first cooperative game, but it certainly put cooperative games on the map. And it also kind of introduced lots of other things. And we also use it as a design teaching tool because Matt Leacock originally developed Pandemic using a pack of cards. And in fact, there was an amazing exhibit in the Victoria and Albert Children's Museum a few years ago where he provided his game design notes, and yeah, they just showed the different locations as cards, and he'd kind of provided some of those so you could see what he'd written on them. Really fascinating. So one of the other things about Pandemic, and one of the other things about the games beforehand, is when you look at the way that they are presented and their kind of strap lines, everything's very exciting. There's this sense of emergency. I love this. I love the Doctor. I think she's the researcher, actually. She really reminds me of Beverly Crusher. She always has. But look at these guys. They're just like they're whizzing into action. You know, they're right there. The pandemic is a new challenge. It's really exciting. And the central strapline of Pandemic, the series, is, can you save humanity? Well, you know, obviously we've kind of been living with that, and it turns out that the reality, whilst it is modelled by Pandemic, the board game, very effectively, is obviously rather different. And these are some of the spin-offs which I think go even further. I really love the Pandemic Contagion on the left-hand side, which has the line, "You are the disease, there is no cure." And I can't imagine anybody actually giving us that this year. You know, I can't imagine somebody coming to the table with a game and saying, you know, this is the title for it. And similarly, Pandemic: The Cure, which is kind of sort of made up to almost sort of appear as if it's a medicine. The emphasis here is on a medicine. It's like there's no injection here. It's kind of like a pill. And the board game itself, actually, there are little tokens that are tiny little needles, but it seems to sort of suggest that, again, you can sort of shoot into action. It's very fast acting. Pandemic: The Cure is a very quick game. And it sort of, you know, it's over and done, and it's all about dice rolling and randomization. And yeah, the kind of infection spreads very rapidly. Again, you know, something that obviously we saw this year. But this is a pretty common theme in board games, like curing, because it makes you a hero, right? There's this very realistic thing that's happening that, of course, would never happen, but it might do, you know, in all these sort of scenarios. And at the same time, presenting it as this kind of exciting, quick fix kind of thing is very much what these games do. And even games like Pandemic Legacy, which is a legacy game that is played, each game takes place over the course of a month, and it's a board game that you destroy as you play it and you change the board. Even that kind of takes place over the course of a year. I actually had to stop playing Pandemic Legacy with the person I was playing it with. Not because we were geographically separated. I'll go on to why that wasn't a problem in a bit. But because we found the randomization that was happening on our board very troubling. On the board that I was playing, the pandemic broke out first in a really serious way in Asia, in the sort of Chinese area, and it began to spread. And in fact, that particular strain of the pandemic became entrenched. We knew that we'd never be able to fully cure it. As the game develops, and slight spoilers for Pandemic Legacy here, there is cities begin to be blockaded, and the first city that we quarantined that was a random card draw was Mexico City. So we were literally building walls between America and South America. And I think at that point it was February 2020, and I couldn't play it anymore. We just had to stop. I found it was really quite distressing that this seemed to be happening on this board. And of course we knew that this was random, but it felt so close. It was frightening. But here's how, sort of lighter topic, here's how disease is dealt with in other board and card games. This is respectively Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, I love these spell cards, they're so useful. And a game called Gloomhaven. And you can see here that there's a kind of sort of casualness. And this is a line from, I seem to remember it's the Dungeon Master's Guide. I took it off D&D Beyond earlier. A disease that does more than infect a few party members is primarily a plot device. So there's this kind of throwaway nature to it. Like you get infected with diseases all the time in Dungeons and Dragons because creatures attack you and they're diseased. So there are spells that help you fix that. Detect poison and disease. You need a U-leaf or a focus or whatever. But again, it only takes 10 minutes to sort it out. Duration, it's a concentration spell, so you need to kind of concentrate a little bit. And then it's got these weird blocks. It's blocked by 1 foot of snow, 1 inch of common metal, a thin sheet of lead, or 3 feet of wood or dirt. And I think that's just a sort of range thing. That's just a practical element of the game. And the thing that I think is really interesting about the spell Lesser Restoration is it's not only a very low level spell, but it's this kind of cure-all. And pretty much everyone who can cast a spell who isn't a wizard can do it. You get sick, cast Lesser Restoration, Bob's your uncle, you're cured. And then finally, there's this kind of fantastic line from Gloomhaven, because one of the other things that disease is often associated with in board games is our friend, the plague doctor. I love plague doctors. I've actually gave a paper about plague doctors in games again about 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, and this is this kind of wonderful line of an encounter, a city card in Gloomhaven. Killing monsters and demons is one thing, but the Plague Herald shouldn't be preying on people in the city. It's like, go off and infect the monsters, that's fine, but don't be naughty with the citizens. And it's just kind of so light, and again it's easy to fix it. If you look at the card on the top left hand side, the Pendant of the Plague, you can not only poison someone, you can curse them as well. It's that easy. It's that easy to make somebody ill that you can do 2 things rather than 1. And actually that's quite an expensive card, but that's just part of the game. So this is another game that anybody who listens to the Adventure Zone, which unfortunately I won't be talking about during this, and I certainly won't be engaging with the fan stuff because I really enjoyed listening to it last year. I felt it was a panacea for being in isolation. But at the moment, the Adventure Zone are setting up a new game. And they are playing, in order to world build, this game called The Quiet Year. And this is, again, one of the encounter cards. You have 64 encounters during the year, and this is one of them. And they actually deal with this during the podcast. It's in, I think, the 3rd episode. And the card says this: disease spreads through the community. So you have a choice. You can either spend the week quarantining and treating the disease, and I'm afraid I have text over this, but Project Dice are, I think it says, not reduced this week. And nobody knows what to do about it. Add health and fertility as a scarcity. So whilst having scarcities in the game is a kind of bad thing, it, again, is not, it takes a week, you'll be fine, everything's okay. You know, it's seen as a very kind of trivial thing. And yeah, I think we will see a change in game design when that, you know, as this goes forwards. I doubt we are going to see 1 week of quarantine being an option within a game going forwards. And the Quiet Year, again, 2013, and then was re-released in 2019. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to talk about what I'm calling the pivot. This is the point at which in February and March 2020, we went from one way of looking at things to another. We turned our backs on the outside. We had to go inside. We couldn't meet anymore. We couldn't do these things. And suddenly we had to rethink the way that we felt and thought about things. And this is incredibly apparent in the way that board games and video games were treated by the World Health Authority and other people. So this is, and again, I'm sure some of you are kind of aware of this, that in 2018, the World Health Organization released a sort of health paper in which they classified video games as being addictive. And this was kind of the first time it had happened. They called it game disorder, and it's even got this horrible code. And I love this image. I think this image is amazing, of this blank-eyed nobody playing, staring into your, you know, staring kind of directly at them. There's no defining characteristics. You know, they look like a robot. There is this, you know, it's a very sort of eye-catching image. And this was actually an image that was released by the World Health Authority organization. Apologies. Now we can measure how many people are affected. And this is what they said. And the too long don't read of gaming disorder and internet addiction, which gaming disorder was part of, was that it would cause significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So this is what the World Health Organization was saying. They were basically saying games, bad, evil, will destroy your life, will destroy everybody else's life, addictive, problematic, need to be sorted out. We need to think about them as a sort of health problem, danger, danger, danger. This is what they said. Alexa, stop, thank you. You've got to say thanks because she might take over the world, so be polite. Anyway, so this is what they were saying in 2018. This is what they said in March 2020. I laugh every time I see this. This is the pivot. This is the turning on their heels, completely disregarding. Suddenly, it turns out games are really good. They're really useful. They keep you indoors. But they also mean you can socialize. Who knew it? Games are social. It's amazing. Would have never realized. All those things that you can't do now, you can do them online. And I think this game is June's Journey. I'm not sure, but again, you know, look at these two people. They're picking up an old-fashioned telephone to talk to each other. And in the middle, there's a prize, there's money, there's, you know, excitement and electricity bolts, and oh, they look so happy. But crucially, they're not touching each other. Sometimes adventures can happen right at home, ! With many of us staying inside lately, why not find another way to escape and explore? So the language is about being outside. The language is about exploring, finding something new worlds, new territory, new places. We've added some special extra awards for all of you that visit your friends' islands. Play a part together. Playtika and Wooga, which is the name of the company. And so this is what the World Health Authority organization, sorry, I've just got that in my head, haven't I? This is what they said in March 2020. The World Health Organization, WHO, and the video game industry have teamed up on #PlayApartTogether, a promotional campaign which encourages healthy physical distancing. Healthy, right? Again, escape, explore, be healthy, stay fit, almost like. By bringing special events, exclusives, activities, rewards, big money, big prizes. an inspiration to some of the most popular games in the world, and who partnered with absolutely everybody. They partnered with 30 of the major games companies. This is Riot Games' response with League of Legends. And I love this logo, which is the one at the top, which was released by Who, which again says, play a part together. And the word apart is in bold. And there is a line between the A and the P. So it's a part, play a part together, as well as being a part. It's very stark, but the image at the bottom shows great excitement by the League of Legends characters. They can't wait to play a part together. They're incredibly happy. They're rushing towards you in the image again. The characters on the left and the right are focused so that their sort of expressions, their eyes focus on yourself, and they're kind of coming at you. They're very, very excited. It's going to be great. And this pivot, you just see it absolutely everywhere. This idea of just the sort of amazement that games can give, the social value that they can give, the replacement for loneliness that they will give you. And I mean, I can only hope that this is how it stays, because this is what gaming scholars have been trying to tell the media TM for years. So, okay, so let's have some statistics, because what actually happened? So first of all, I want to just focus back on board games, and I'm going to talk a little bit about tabletop role-playing games as well. That's partly because it's easier to get hold of the statistics at the moment. The board games industry sort of released some early figures, but I'm waiting for the next cycle of sales figures to come out, basically. So in 2018, this was released by UK Games Exhibition. The board games industry was worth £350 million in the UK. The board games industry is worth no, I think that's the games industry. The games industry is worth 17.2 billion in the world. Okay, we're not pissing around here. I mean, for kind of obvious reasons, the board games and games industry immediately outstripped cinema and television revenue at the beginning of 2020, but it was doing that already. I know I've said this before, but when The Last of Us was released, it outsold Superman versus Batman, which was the big release in the cinema at that time. So sorry, Henry Cavill, you're just lovely in The Witcher, but no, sorry. In the first week of lockdown, the board games industry experienced a 240% increase in sales. Literally everybody went inside and they thought, how are we going to entertain ourselves? And they bought board games. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both why this happened and what actually happened. Like, what were people doing? This was kind of the main area of what I actually looked at. What did they actually think about this? How did they pivot? Because it's worth remembering that the player isn't kind of who we think it is, or it's not really who the media is. And I'd like to just thank the Sims for this great image. So again, my photo box is obscuring part of this quote. So more than half of people who play board games, that's 58%, always play with friends. And I'm guessing that says and acquaintances, while 37% say they're usually in the company of friends. Just 5% say they sometimes, rarely, or never play among their comrades. Okay, sure, we play with friends. We're board gamers, we know that. You know, we go to a board gaming cafe, or we have our friends round, or perhaps we go to an event like this and we play board games. The people who aren't playing are these people. I hate these people. I hate them. As my friend points out, first of all, health and safety. You really shouldn't hang your stockings like that over a roaring fire. But these are the people that the kind of mainstream media still represents as the people who buy board games. And I just want to dissect this image, because you go anywhere on kind of looking for stock footage of people playing board games and you get this image. So first of all, they're playing Chinese checkers, which is a boring game. Secondly, they're sitting on the floor. This says two things. Firstly, that games are toys for children because children play games on the floor. And secondly, it's super uncomfortable. I mean, even that dude at the back looks uncomfortable. He's kind of got his knee up to sort of brace himself. There's also something else going on here, which is that you see both the male figures in an active position, and then the two female figures are not touching the board. They're not holding components. Lady at the back's obviously kind of about to set herself on fire. She's much too close to that fire and not paying any attention to it. No one's opened any other Christmas presents apart from boring, poor old Chinese checkers. And this is kind of miserable. When we see advertising for board games, and again, I just had to read so many of these ghastly things, they will often recommend games that are traditional games. And in my last paper, I talked about this, in the last talk that I gave at Punctuation, I talked about this quite a lot. Monopoly is a game that is 115 years old. We could probably do with not using it as an example of really good gaming. And I am not here to have the discussion about Monopoly, okay? So just no. But when you read recommendations, they are most often of Monopoly, Scrabble, sometimes a game of life, a trivia game, probably another trivia game, or another version of Monopoly. And then the recommendations will be of children's games, and these will be sort of titled as fun for all the family. And it's like, this isn't fun. These games aren't fun. First of all, you've got games that are very short-lived. You play a trivia game once, you know the answers, can't play it again. Games for children are not the same as games for adults. Children might find them interesting, but there's, again, the sort of level of play is difficult. And then secondly, you have these kind of very old, not particularly interesting games. And I've also kind of talked about this extensively elsewhere, so I'm kind of not going to go into it. But these things cropped up a lot at the beginning of the pandemic. So that 240% sales was sort of supported by just dozens and dozens of articles recommending games to play. And there was a fantastic response to this in The Guardian, because The Guardian did one of these articles, which is just crazy considering that they actually have a board games writer on their books. So don't know why they did this. And what somebody in the comments said, it was like going to a video games recommendation page to be told that Space Invaders was really kind of cool. And it really kind of feels like that, Again, we're fairly well, we know games have moved on, but the media is very happy with this particular family, and you can find versions of them everywhere. Again, just want to go back to who's actually buying and what's actually going on. Okay, so this is for figures for D&D. So Dungeons & Dragons has seen a 65% year-on-year growth in just Europe alone, and that's again from 2019, got nothing to do with pandemic, but really kind of, you can see how it's coming up. I think this statistic is absolutely fascinating. 40% of players are under 24, and 40 to 45 is only 11%. So this perception that it's a game that's played by people who perhaps played it as they were younger and have gone up in gaming groups is not accurate. The people who are playing it, like my students, are super into D&D. I mean, sure, they're gaming students, but one of them kind of shared his actual play blog with me. And it was just, watching young people learn to tell stories, and the absolute kind of escapism that they were experiencing. And, I kind of understand. And it was really interesting to watch the creation or read the creation of what seemed a pretty basic story to me, but they were just enjoying it so much. I mean, this is the student who had to take, all the other students came up to me in class a couple of years ago and said, "We're really sorry, X can't come into class. He was really, really upset last night because his character died." and he got a bit drunk. And now he's in bed feeling sad that his character died. And the student who told me said, I gave him the option to keep him alive. But he didn't take it, he wanted to die. So they were kind of experiencing the whole kind of what's called bleed in and bleed out of playing games. But then this fantastic final statistic again of who is playing. It's people who are very transmedial, people who are watching on Twitch. You know, they're watching Critical Role, they're watching Into the Motherland, they're watching all of these actual plays, they're possibly listening to them as well. So their perception of what the game is very different. And this player is not the player that we are usually taught is the sort of standard game player, Dungeons and Dragons player. Okay, so let's go back to the pivot and why this is important, like why this particular player base really affected stuff. Alas, I don't have time to talk about Animal Crossing again, and that's another paper. Justin McElroy, for me, kind of epitomized it where he, again, talking about it in, I think, June, said, as we speak, this game is saving lives. An incredibly powerful and important point of gaming during lockdown. Some fascinating stuff, but again, sorry, no time. But okay, so that family that I just showed you are not the people who are playing games. We've got that one, okay? So who is playing? So it's kind of in this order. First of all, it's groups in lockdown together. So it's my students who are in shared houses and have decided they're going to stay in those rather than go back to their parents, although most of them did. It's couples who are self-isolating together. And bear in mind, this is kind of lockdown 1 and 2 rather than the sort of interim periods, although, you know, we haven't really had a chance to meet in between. It's gaming groups that have been separated. So it's people who would usually meet, perhaps play D&D every month or so, every 2 weeks, or get together for board games, or maybe go to events together. And at the bottom is families. And I don't want to discount the fact that children's games sold a huge amount during this period as well, but it's not really the area that I've been looking at. What I've been primarily looking at is these top 3 groups. Now, the people who spend money on board games at the moment, and again, I have the stats, but I didn't include them, are in a demographic where they are, it's a really weird number, 27, they're aged 27 to 35. I'm not quite sure why that particular age band was used. Asmodee stats, you have to ask them. They are often don't have children yet, young professionals, living with other young professionals, and relatively high disposable income, because board games are expensive. You know, a decent game, or a big box game as they're known, is between £50 and 80, with a game like Gloomhaven running up to about £130. You know, these aren't cheap, and leads to quite a lot of interesting spending as a result. But these are the people that are playing. Okay, so what happens? Well, the first thing is there's this kind of idea, again, this is another slogan that was used by Wizards of the Coast, play together, win together. So this idea of togetherness, again, we've got to group up, we've got to do it somehow. The initial pivot was concerned on making content available, just giving you free shit to get engaged and keep engaging. And part of this was altruism. You know, these are big companies and they're panicking a little bit because they're thinking, oh my goodness, no one can go to board game shops or sit down together or go to a cafe or meet in a pub and play a game anymore. But they also kind of have a history of knowing how to convert things. So, for example, Pandemic Hot Zone, I've put the link in and I'll put this up afterwards. You can just print it out yourself. If you go to that link, you really need a very high quality printer in order to be able to do it. And as the pandemic went on, I mean, we actually set this as a task for our students to develop when they were designing a game. We wanted them to make a print and play game. And they had to kind of think about things like, what if people don't have tokens, or they don't have a 3D printer, you know? So we have people developing games with, you know, minstrels and walnuts, and, you know, like, what are you going to use a counter? And one of them made a game with a whole load of Lego figures, and so on and so forth. But interestingly, the big companies were already really invested in virtual spaces. They'd been trying to do it for a while. And so they had the infrastructure to pivot. So for example, D&D Beyond, whilst not actually owned by Wizards of the Coast, allows you to play Dungeons and Dragons online. Asmodee have a lot of their board games available online in various iterations. And the platforms are already there. So Tabletopia, Roll20, Tabletop Simulator. There's quite a lot of online stuff that people can shift to that again, is already kind of there. And most, but not all players had actually possibly connected with this in some way previously, even if it was just to check it out. So whilst there was an absolutely gigantic increase in people playing on all of these platforms, you know, and signing up and having accounts, there was also a lot of evidence of people who were returning. So they already had an account and they were logging back in to see if they could play online. And again, play online with their friends, bring together people that they already knew and kind of get back into the gaming world. Okay, so you would have thought everything happy, right? Problem solved, amazing. We can play online, it's going to be the best. Look at these happy people down at the bottom here. They're all just happy and smiling and they're really enjoying playing this wonderful Dungeons and Dragons game. And if you look at the top image here, this shows all of your character sheets available. There's a lovely little picture of your character and you can write notes in and then you can access the rules. Like one of the things about Dungeons and Dragons Beyond is, whilst the game manuals are really great for Dungeons and Dragons, they're really difficult to access things really quickly. You can literally just type in what you want and up it comes, okay? So you would have thought that everybody would just be like absolutely ecstatic, you know? And yeah, we see this massive rise in people who are shooting off to these websites and starting to try and find out how they can alternatively play. Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, as I say, everyone lives happily ever after. Unfortunately, we can't see anyone, but we can kind of see them, so it's going to be great. But actually, this is not what happened. Oh, sorry about you. Okay. So this is not what happened at all. Sure, people bought stuff online. People started playing online, but they also started buying stuff like it was going out of print, which in some cases it did. Dungeons and Dragons and associated companies, and again, as I know the statistic is a little bit higher actually, but this is just the one that I managed to find. There is a 30% rise in sales of books, games, dice, and terrain. I mean, I bought those dice during lockdown there. And I bought some character sheets because I don't have a printer. And you can just about see the spell card at the bottom there. They were super useful. And a bunch of board games actually just sell out. They just sell out. This is physical copies. They sell out straight away, including Pandemic, and including a sort of very highly recommended other game, which I also recommend, called Wingspan. So people are playing online, but they're also buying stuff. They're buying a lot of stuff. And why are they doing this? And so this is kind of, this is what my research tried to find out. Like, why are people doing this? Because that's interesting, right? You would have thought they're kind of Dungeons and Dragons Beyond. You spend a certain, well, it's free to use initially, but then if you want the manuals, you spend a bulk fee and you get everything, and it is infinitely cheaper than buying all those hardbacks. Like, yeah. So what's going on? Okay. So the first thing is, and this is a piece of research that I'd just like to thank David Gunn, one of my students, who did a survey on this. He went off and asked Dungeons and Dragons players what they were doing in lockdown. And one of the things that he found, like, again, the things that he found were absolutely fascinating. But one of the things that he found was that people initially went to online platforms, but they didn't take their games with them. They started new games. And this sentiment, he found, was really predominated. And he said this actually happened to his own gaming group, that there were 7 of them. They'd been playing a campaign in, I don't think it was D&D, I think it was something else, but they'd been playing a campaign for 2.5 years. So they were quite a long way along. And they didn't feel that playing online would be true to their characters. So they benched the game for the future, and they started a completely new game with new characters. And this seemed to be a really common thing. And I think one of the reasons is not so much about characters, it's about the fact that, you know, you do still have to input all that information into a screen, you know, onto a character sheet. And I think for a lot of people that felt it's time to do. But I also think they kind of felt that it really brought them face to face with the fact their character wasn't real. And sure, we all know our characters aren't real, but when they literally become a piece of paper and you're having to retype all their stats rather than just changing maybe hit points up and down, or perhaps rolling, you know, as you level up, I think that kind of brought people a bit face to face with the fact that they weren't with their friends anymore. You know, they were having to play online. David also said that one of the things that people also said is that they actually found the online medium they didn't feel that their characters were as authentic when they were all kind of in a chat like this together or on Roll20, that there was something about looking into each other's faces, which again, sure, we do that to a certain amount, but when we're playing, we look around, we roll our dice, we look down, we sometimes close our eyes when we're thinking. And he sort of found that was actually another kind of issue. So first of all, there's this kind of idea of truism. But let's just quickly flash back to 2011. And I talked earlier about Asmodee having a sort of established online presence and being kind of very good at converting games. So in 2011, they launched Ticket to Ride, which I hope many of you have played. And if not, it's still a brilliant game. It's a fantastic game. They launched it online and it did really well. It didn't do well straight away. It got picked up kind of about 8 months after it had been online to coincide with, there was an expansion that was released, and apologies, I can't remember which one it was. And suddenly it started really selling. But then what happened is the physical copy started selling and selling. And they realized that every time they released an update, so a new map onto the game online, they actually found physical sales would go up. And there were kind of more copies of the game, and the popularity of the game is actually partially attributed to this online presence. So there is already this direct correlation between having a board game online and going away and buying the physical copy so that you can play it for real, because it's the same game. So that's a kind of established thing. One of the other things both David and I discovered is that, and I suspect that many of you also discovered in other aspects of your life, is that we tried to reach out to each other by providing each other with physical things. There was a lot of letter writing and sending cards and sending gifts to people, and still is. I mean, a really good example is, I think some of you know I have a partner who's in Dublin, so we can't see each other. We haven't seen each other for a year now. We buy each other lunch on Deliveroo quite often. And we send each other a lot of things. You know, we send each other just presents. It's just, you know, and they're not big, you know, they're not expensive. They're just things, a lot of things. So gifting became a big thing. And one of the good things about games is that you can buy things that are completely irrelevant or just extras for kind of cheap. A set of dice, yeah, sure, it's not the cheapest thing on earth, but it's a nice present. I think I was talking in the park run earlier about the gelatinous soap that I was given. I was given a gelatinous soap which has got dice inside it. It's completely silly. What a wonderful gift. It's not, I don't really need more dice. You saw how many dice I've got in the other picture. That's not even half of my dice. I've got lots of dice. And I also got given these wonderful spell cards, which they're just so useful for me. I find remembering this kind of thing really difficult. And obviously, I seem to remember the gooses in the treasure hunt, in the scavenger hunt. But Meg McDonald sent me these fantastic badges, you know, and kind of just all these little things. So yeah. But the other thing is that playing online, and I just kind of alluded to this, it feels fiddly. So for me, being given these spell cards to be able to play online was, it will be fantastic when I'm actually playing in person with them as well. But they just made things easier for me. They made it easier for me to play D&D with other people. You know, they kind of, and I felt a sense of connection from having them. And again, the sort of sales of peripheral things to gaming, to board gaming, really, really rose, you know, like lots and lots of dice, lots of bits, lots of fiddly things, lots of nice things to make us feel a bit better. Kind of, again, pleasure that's not food kind of thing. So making things easier and gifting is another thing. Okay, just keeping an eye on the time. So people also appear to have bought games proactively for the future. If you've played the exit games on the left-hand side, they are sort of one-shot little box games. I did consider bringing one in, didn't in the end. They're sort of one-shot little escape room box games that you play with one or two other people. You can't play them. You can't play these ones online. I mean, you could, but it would be fiddly. I realised that I bought every single one. I've now got seven or eight in the other room that are unopened. I haven't been able to play any of them. I don't want to play them on my own. I actually bought a couple of jigsaw puzzles in the same series as well. I bought a copy of Wingspan, and I'll go on to that in a minute. And I also invested in the new Gloomhaven game, which I mentioned earlier. You know, the first game, the first version, Gloomhaven, has over 1,000 pieces in it. Like, this isn't a sort of trivial fiddly game. And I actually discovered that, again, the person who I was playing it with, unfortunately, their computer is not high enough spec to play it online. So I'm not buying it to play it right now. I'm buying it for some mythical, you know, when we meet again, we're going to do nothing but play games. We're not going to do nothing but play games. You know, that we're going to do nothing but just games and games and games and games and games. And when we're together again. And I noticed this again, and David in his studies also picked this up in his survey. I'm playing on Tuesday nights a different role-playing game, and the people in that group are all from Ireland. I've met them in person, most of them 2 or 3 times, and they keep saying, when we're together again, as if we're all going to group up. And we're probably not. That's the thing that I think is really fascinating. This gaming group wouldn't have really formed, though the people in that group don't all live together. They live in Cork and Dublin and, you know, different places. And sure, we're friends. Oh, and Oxford as well. But there's this kind of mythical idea that there'll be this kind of Halcyon future where, and of course, we will meet again, and we're starting to do that. But it kind of became this. Again, the kind of aspiration and the aspiration through purchase became a really big thing. And as I say, you can see it in figures, up to the point that people are buying things that are sort of pointless. I don't need 8 versions of the escape game. Every time I look at this image, it's annoying because that is a one that I don't have, and I'm not going to go and buy it. I've got other things to spend my money on, but I want to, you know. So why is this happening? So first of all, I've sort of said players already use transmedia to play. They're kind of aware of this. They understand that you can kind of do a bit of both, and that's fine. You can play D&D online and use D&D Beyond, but have spell cards at the same time. Like, we're actually quite chameleon-like in our game playing. I think the interesting thing about lockdown was that we did really quickly flip to all rushing onto online and working out ways that we could play. And for some people that really tailed off. So you do see a big rise at the beginning, and then again, some players just sort of drifted away. They just found it too difficult, or Zoom fatigue, or whatever. But actually it's very, very healthy still, in, you know, in terms of sort of continuous play. There was a lot of wish fulfillment purchasing when we're together again. I've not really talked about doubling up, but this is also interesting. So again, I'm not the only person that did this, but there's a definite rise in people buying the same game so that they can physically play it in different locations. So John, I know that we sort of talked about this the last time we talked about this. I bought all the versions of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, and I sent a set to Fergal as a Christmas present as well. So I effectively bought this game twice so that we could both play it together, so that we're both physically looking at it rather than having to fiddle around with cameras or go online. So that's double the price, you know, it was a Christmas present and a half. So, you know, there's all this kind of, yeah, people buying things for themselves. Purchase figures also show that we buy things in clusters because as I said, games are expensive. So one person will buy one game. I'll buy Takenoko and you buy Azul. And when we get together, we'll play both. But we can't really afford to do both. But now I'm like, I want a copy of Wingspan because the other one's in Ireland. Again, it's a completely kind of false thing here. So this idea of doubling up of games that could be just about played, for realsies. And I actually submitted a chapter at the end of last week, and when the comments came back on it, I'd mentioned this in the chapter, and the person who replied said, yeah, I'm playing Scythe at the moment. And wow, I can't imagine that. That sounds really complicated. And he said, I'm literally looking at my copy of Scythe that's kind of set up in that kind of, play-by-mail chess way. Scythe is available as an app online, or a game online. It's not difficult to find. And yet suddenly everybody's having their own copy. We've also got the fact that we can't do what we usually do, which is borrow somebody else's game, go to a library, board games library, perhaps, again, go to a board games event, perhaps all sit down together. Somebody's brought one game, someone's brought another. That's just not happening. And then finally is this idea of effort. Maybe some of the drop off or some of the change was kind of, things are different at the moment. Let's do things differently. Let's play differently. Let's start new characters. Let's play a different game. The game that I'm playing with the Irish group is very specifically kind of is a new game. They were all playing one previously. And then, lockdown happens and they start playing a completely different game, completely different campaign. And luckily, they include me. So yeah, okay, so to conclude, and that's kind of good timing. So what's kind of going on here? Well, first of all, we're flexible, we're transmedial creatures. We're good at being virtual and non-virtual. If you think back to that kind of age group again, the under 24s playing Dungeons and Dragons, that's not a group who are immediately going to rush to pen and paper. They're going to shoot to online and they're going to work out ways to adapt. And actually for them, it doesn't feel like adaptation. I mean, certainly my students didn't see playing D&D Beyond as, they saw it as a financial thing because it's quite expensive if you go beyond the free subscription model. But they didn't see it as something that they wouldn't have included anyway. Again, when I spoke to the, because it's a games department, we actually teach D&D, we have a course on D&D. And when we spoke to the people there, they often said, yeah, our GM has it and uses the expanded stuff, but then we thought that we might do it. So the kind of cost is there, but they take that as a default that there'll be an online version that they can use somehow, and they kind of flip around a lot. We've got an innate desire to connect. I think everybody, even the most introverted of us, has discovered that this year. But we also reached out. We sent physical things. We replaced things. That the kind of idea of gifting and trying to provide a sense of normality or treating ourselves, or again, for some of us having disposable income that we couldn't spend on other things, but we could spend on these things. And kind of best fit, I've sort of talked about that. We're seeing now a shift in board game design that moves away from pieces, basically. As you'd sort of expect after this year, board game design is also becoming flatter so that it will go through your postbox. So there's kind of really interesting things that are coming up, but that's very slow. Again, if you kind of look at some of the Kickstarter stuff, there are big box games, but they tend to be kind of like this rather than, the sort of towers and meeples and plastic figures and all these things just sort of receding a little bit, unless they were games that were being developed pre-March 2020. And finally, alas, this is all very, very related to our relationship with capitalism. We wanted things, we wanted shinies, we wanted dice, we wanted we wanted to spend money to make ourselves feel better. And when you put it that starkly, that is kind of a bad thing, but it's also kind of what happened. So there you go. Yeah, I was 3 minutes over what I was hoping. So yeah, any questions? Anyone got any thoughts as well? Because obviously this is something that I'm kind of in the process of writing up at the moment. And
Okay,
I'm quite
hi Esther, you've had a bunch of comments. Some of my favorite ones so far were Malcolm's comment that young people play D&D and old ones prefer Call of Cthulhu. Yes, I thought that was very funny as well. And Griffin also said that they've ticked cat off on the Esther bingo, so well done for that.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, okay. Some more serious comments. Alison was saying that that put this thing of putting things online, then supporting physical sales, is not unique to board games, and it tends to happen all over the place. You know.
Yeah. And it's certainly something I kind of, we saw it happening, and I basically need the papers that prove that aren't just the Ticket to Ride thing. And yeah, we totally did. And not just this year. Yeah, it's interesting.
Exactly. And Anne Louise had made an interesting comment about screen fatigue being an issue, especially with people working from home. I work from home. I spend all bloody day in front of a computer, and really in the evening, I'm just, I haven't got the mental exercise for energy for anything. So
yeah, and both of the role-playing games that I'm playing at the moment are specifically without cameras. Oh, poor old David Gunn. He did this fantastic piece of research, and then I kind of did a bit as well. And I'm really hoping he kind of goes on to extrapolate this a bit more. But at the end of it, he said, I wish I'd asked more questions. And that was one of them, was how are you actually doing it? Because he found that people tailed off because of screen fatigue, but he realized then that he hadn't asked them. Another thing that I just want to sort of add from David's research, which really, really wowed us, was he was asked, in order to work out geographically where people were, he asked them what dates their lockdowns were. So he managed to internationally kind of pinpoint people a little bit, which I thought was very clever. One of the groups that he interviewed, one of his questions was, how did you meet? What did you do? And one of the groups continued to meet. There were 7 of them, and they met every week during the lockdown. And they were a UK group. And there was a sort of follow-on question of any kind of comments, and they said scaremongering in the media didn't bother us. We continued to meet in person throughout both lockdowns, and that really gobsmacked me. And again, when he did his Viva, he got asked a lot of questions about that, and he was like, I couldn't, questions are the questions, they were anonymous, so can't go back and find out any more than that. So yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Richard Stevenson asked about dividing games into those that were easier to play online and those that were physical, where you can see and move stuff. And that actually led me on to a thought about, are there any games that really can't be played online? Big war games, for example, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say probably Twister would be a bit problematic.
Yeah. And I think I would have said that the whole point of something like Warhammer was to have all the little things to show off, all the little soldiers.
Yeah, I think there is an element of display in a lot of things, particularly things that involve miniatures, that involve painting or kind of secondary skills. Online versions do exist. Again, I've seen a lot of people making creative uses of cameras and, stands that sort of top down that you can put your phone on so people can see what's going on. Certainly at the beginning, there was a real feeling that kind of the sky's the limit and we can adapt. I think as time went on, some things did adapt. So there's, obviously a really dramatic increase in Magic the Gathering's a really good example. They've got loads of really good games online. So their infrastructure was there already. they pivoted like that. They just were straight. They're like, all the tournaments are online. We're going to use this. This is going to happen. And then they've just gone through a process of honing and tweaking and revising. So instead of being, so it has become a bit more personal as well. So I think the answer is kind of yes and no. Like, it's not impossible, but that doesn't mean that it's better or desirable sometimes for people. Like, I think, again, a lot of people stopped after a while or realized that they might want to do things slightly differently. And I think this is this kind of idea of campaigns halting and new ones starting, just to give people this kind of sense of something that would also end as well. Like, there's kind of a finiteness to, well, we're going to start a new campaign, but when this is over, those characters are going to go away and we're going to go back to our old one, So, yeah.
I presume you wouldn't be at all surprised to hear that a significant chunk of your audience spent a significant chunk of time talking about their dice.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, if you really want, I could just go and get some dice and just show you dice. I really recommend the gelatinous soap, though. It was.
All right, so basically we have actually reached the end of the time. Thank you very much, Esther. If anybody else wants to carry on, we can move to one of the party rooms, or there's our Ask on Discord as well. But thank you very much. Nobody else is here to applaud, so I'll applaud.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for sort of making your way through the first time that I've actually given this talk. So yeah, thank you. All right. Okay.
Okay. And if anybody needs me to switch on their video, come and ask. Oh, hello, John.
Hello.
Hello.
Great talk, Esther.
Thank you.
I'm gonna nip off to cooking, but it was really good. I enjoyed it very much. I missed the start, so I'm gonna have to watch the recording. But yes.
Brilliant. Cool. And I'm actually on the